I walked slowly up the porch steps, thinking about my conversation with Wendy Prescott. The neighbor had invited me in for tea, and in between she told me a story that I couldn't get out of my head now. Her daughter Linda, who had once seemed such a sweet girl, had thrown her own mother out of the house on the pretext that it was too big for an old woman. Wendy now lived in a tiny apartment on the outskirts of Roanoke, while Linda and her family took over her parents' house, with its spacious rooms and well-tended garden. Listening to her story, I thought at the time that I would never understand how anyone could do that to their parents. Wendy raised 3 children alone after her husband died, working double shifts as a nurse to educate them. And now in her 68 years, she had to rent a one-bedroom apartment because her daughter decided it was better for mom to live apart. Linda explained it by concern for her mother's health. Say, a large house is too hard to clean, and the neighborhood is not the same. But Wendy understood her daughter's true motives. The keys jingled in the lock, and I stepped over the threshold of my house on Jefferson Street. It was the house I had bought 30 years ago when I married Ruth. We'd picked it out together, walking through the rooms, planning where to put the furniture, where the nursery would be. Ruth wanted a spacious kitchen, and I wanted a garage for the car and a workshop. The house turned out to be exactly as we had envisioned it, a 2-story house with 4 bedrooms, a large living room, and a kitchen where the whole family could gather. The light was on in the living room, and I could hear muffled voices. The son Ted and his wife Mizelle were talking animatedly, but they stopped talking as soon as they heard my footsteps. I sensed a tension in the air, as if they had been waiting for my return with particular impatience. "Dad, you're just in time," Ted said, rising from the couch. He was 37 years old, but sometimes I could tell he sounded like a cranky teenager, especially when it came to money. After high school, he'd gone to technical school, but he'd never finished, carried away by the idea of getting rich quick. He worked as a mechanic, a salesman, a loader, but never stayed in any place for long. He said his bosses didn't appreciate him, his coworkers were jealous, and his salary didn't match his abilities. Maisel sat at the coffee table, some papers in front of her. She was 4 years younger than her husband, worked part-time at a cosmetics store, and often complained of fatigue. They met at a bar where Mizelle worked part-time as a waitress in the evenings. Ted had introduced her to me as the love of his life, but I had sensed something calculating about her from the start. Now she had a strange smile on her face, as if she knew something important and pleasant. "Sit down, Dad. We need to talk," Ted continued, pointing to the chair across from the couch. I hung my jacket on the back of the chair and settled into my favorite chair that had been in this living room for 20 years. I'd bought it after my wife Ruth died, when I realized I now had to set up house anew, adjust to life as a widower with a 10-year-old son in my arms. Ruth died of lung cancer, fought for 2 years, but the disease was stronger. In the last few months, I've barely left her bedside, taking unpaid vacations to be near her. "What do you want to talk about?" I asked, though I could tell from the looks on Ted and Maisel's faces that it wasn't going to be about the weather. In the 5 years they'd lived with me, they'd had these conversations regularly. They needed money for car repairs, or for Mizelle's dental work, or for Ted's continuing education courses, which he never finished. I never said no because Ted was my only son, and I wanted him to succeed in life. Mizelle straightened up and folded her hands on the table. "Grover, Ted and I have been discussing our family situation. You know, we've all been living together for 5 years now, sharing a household, and we feel like it's time to get some financial clarity." I frowned. What kind of clarity? In those 5 years, I'd helped them out with money more than once, and no one had ever demanded any accountability. When Ted lost his job at the auto shop, he'd been fired there for absenteeism and a conflict with his boss. I'd paid off their car loan 3 months in advance. When Mizelle had dental problems, I gave money for treatment, although the amount was not small. I bought groceries in the house mostly and paid for utilities myself, and now they need financial clarity. "What exactly do you mean?" I asked, trying to speak calmly. Ted took the lead. "Dad, you realize we live as a family. Your pension is the family income. Mizelle works, and I'm trying to get a steady job, but I'm still working part-time. And we thought it would be fair if your pension was distributed more." Evenly. Evenly, I thought. That's an interesting word. It turns out that right now I'm not distributing my pension evenly, probably because I spend some of the money on myself, buying blood pressure medication, going to the hairdresser sometimes, buying books at the secondhand bookstore. More evenly? I asked. Maisel nodded and picked up one of the sheets from the table. We've calculated everything. Your pension is $1,200 a month. If you give us 600 and keep 600 for yourself, it's fair to everyone. I felt something inside me squeeze. They'd done the math, so they'd known the size of my pension for a long time, and they'd made plans for how to use it. $600 out of my pension, half of what I earned in 40 years on the railroad. I started out as a track laborer, then became a train setter, then a train driver. I worked in any weather, in rain and snow, in heat and cold. 40 years of honest labor, and now they want to take half. What do you think I'm going to live on for the remaining $600? I asked. Dad, you don't understand, Ted interjected. That money isn't going to disappear. It's going to be used for general family expenses, for groceries, for utilities, for gasoline. So they'll still be spent on you too. Maisel nodded. That's right. We just want to streamline our spending so that everything is transparent and honest. I leaned back in my chair and looked at them both. Ted was avoiding a direct gaze, rubbing the edge of the pillow. He'd always done that since he was a kid, when he lied or felt uncomfortable. Maisel looked at me with an expression of sincere conviction that she was right. She really thought their proposal was reasonable and fair. I remembered how 5 years ago they had come to me asking to live in my house temporarily until they got back on their feet. Ted had lost his apartment then. He couldn't pay the rent, and Maisel was pregnant. The pregnancy ended in a miscarriage in the 3rd month, but by then they had settled into the 2 bedrooms on the 2nd floor. The temporary residence had been in place for years. How long had you been thinking about it? I asked. Shukranina. Well, frankly, a few months, Maisel admitted. Since you retired, we saw that you were getting a steady income, and we thought it would be wise to use it more efficiently. More efficiently, I repeated to myself. So in their opinion, I was using my pension inefficiently, buying groceries for all 3 of them, paying the electricity, gas, and water bills, giving Ted money for gas and Maisel money for cosmetics and clothes, buying them presents for birthdays and holidays. For months, they'd been thinking about how to get me to give them half my pension. Planning this conversation, drawing up the paperwork, dividing my money before I even gave my consent. Or maybe they didn't even need my consent. Maybe they were just putting me on the spot. What if I don't agree? I asked. Ted finally looked up. Dad, we're a family. Families work things out together. Besides, we're not kicking you out of your own house. We just want our living together to be more, organized. Not kicking you out of your own house? I mentally repeated his words. How generous of them not to kick me out of my own home. The house I'd bought with my own money, the house I'd lived in for 30 years, the house my wife had died in, the house I'd raised my son in. Maisel reached for another sheet of paper. We even made a rough spending plan. Here, take a look. Groceries, $200 a month. Utilities, $150. Gasoline and transportation, $100. Household necessities, $50. The rest you can save or spend on entertainment. She handed me a sheet of paper, written in neat handwriting. I took it and ran my eyes over the lines. Everything was itemized down to the cent. My pension was categorized as if I had already agreed to this absurd plan. In the corner of the sheet was Maisel's signature and the date yesterday. So they'd made this plan last night while I was watching TV in my bedroom. Entertainment, I muttered, reaching the appropriate line. What kind of entertainment do you have in mind? Well, going to the movies once in a while. Going to a restaurant for dinner? Maisel shrugged. Or buying new clothes when you need them. I imagined the 3 of us going to a movie or a restaurant with my money, which they graciously allocated for entertainment. Maisel picking out a dress at the store, and me standing next to her, wondering if I'd have enough left in my pension for the rest of the month. I folded the sheet in half and put it on the coffee table. There was silence in the living room. The clock on the mantel was ticking away, counting down the seconds. I had gotten that clock from my father. It had been going for over half a century. My father had given it to me for my wedding, saying that time was the most precious thing a man had, and that it should be valued. I see, I said at last. So you've already decided. We wanted to discuss it with you first, Ted said quickly. This is our common home, our common family, our joint family. But for some reason, I'm the only one who makes money in this family, and everyone else spends it. Somehow in this joint family, only I own the house, but everyone lives in it. Somehow in this joint family, two people make decisions, but a third person has to fulfill them. I nodded and got up from my chair. I need to think about it. You don't have to wait for me for dinner. I'll eat later. I headed for the stairs leading up to the second floor to my bedroom. I could hear the muffled voices of Ted and Maisel behind me, but I didn't listen to what they were saying. As I walked up the stairs, I thought about my conversation with Wendy Prescott. She was right. Sometimes the closest people are the most ruthless. But I didn't yet know that tomorrow I would wake up with a firm decision that would change the lives of all of us. I came down to the kitchen later than usual in the morning, having been up all night, tossing from side to side, thinking about last night's conversation. Ted had already left for another part-time job, unloading trucks at the supermarket for $15 an hour, and Maisel was sitting at her desk with a cup of coffee and her papers. She was dressed in the pink robe I'd given her last Christmas, her hair in a careless bun. She looked up at me and smiled as if nothing special had happened yesterday. "Good morning, Grover. There's coffee in the coffee maker, and I made pancakes." I poured myself some coffee and sat down across from her. There was indeed a plate of pancakes on the table, still warm and smelling of vanilla. Maisel could cook, I recognized that. But right now, even the smell of fresh baked goods couldn't distract me from thinking about what she'd said last night. "Maisel," I began, stirring the sugar in my coffee, "I've been thinking about your proposal all night." She put aside the sheet she was studying and looked at me carefully. "And what conclusion have you come to?" "I don't understand why you think it's fair for me to give you half of my pension. I already pay all the expenses of the house." Maisel sighed and reached for the folder that lay on the windowsill. It was new, bright blue with family budget, written in her neat handwriting. "Grover, you're misreading the situation. Let me show you all the calculations, then you'll see how reasonable our proposal is." She opened the folder and pulled out several sheets. I wondered, when did she have time to prepare all this? She must have worked on her calculations for more than one day. "Look," she said, spreading out the sheets in front of her, "your pension is $1,200 a month. That's the family income. My earnings at the cosmetics store average $400 a month, but not every month because I work part-time. Ted's earnings are irregular, between $100 and $300 a month depending on part-time jobs." She showed me a spreadsheet of numbers. It was all broken down by month for the last 6 months. I noticed that my income was listed without any qualification, $1,200 each month, and their incomes were very modest and unstable. "Now the expenses," Maisel continued, turning the page. "Taken, we have no mortgage and the house is yours, which is a big plus. But utilities, $170 a month on average. Groceries, $250 to $300. Gas for the car, $120. Car insurance is $80. Internet and cable television, $90. Phone service, $60. Medication for you, about $40 a month." I listened to this list and thought about the fact that almost all of these expenses were already on my shoulders. I paid for utilities myself. Groceries were also bought mostly by me. Gasoline for the car, the same story. I gave Ted money to fill it up. Car insurance was in my name because Ted had problems with his credit history. Total basic expenses are about $1,100 to $1,200 a month, summarized Maisel. And if you add unforeseen expenses, clothing, entertainment, it turns out all $1,400, $1,500. "And what of this follows?" I asked. "That our income is barely enough to cover our expenses, and sometimes not even enough. Remember last month when we asked you for $200 to fix the washing machine?" I remembered. And I remembered that the month before that, they asked for $150 for Maisel's gynecological treatment, and before that, $300 for new tires for the car. "But Maisel, I'm covering all those expenses. What difference does it make if I give you money as you need it, or if I give you a fixed amount every month?" She looked at me with an expression of mild surprise, as if I had asked a very naive question. "The difference is huge, Grover. When we ask you for money for something specific, you sometimes ask why we need it, if we can't do without it, if we can find something cheaper. And this creates tension in the family. We feel like beggars in our own home. In our own home, I noted to myself, interesting wording. And if we get a certain amount each month, she continued, we can plan our own expenses without having to explain each purchase. It would give us more autonomy and save you from having to control what the money is spent on. I tasted the pancake. It was really good, with a slight cinnamon flavor. Mezel used to make them from her grandmother's recipe, she told me. But now even good food seemed like a bribe. Be good, Grover, and we'll feed you good food. Maisel, why half a pension? Why not a third or a quarter? Because we've calculated everything fairly, she replied, pulling out another sheet. There are 3 people in our family. Logically, the expenses should be divided equally among all of them. Your share is $600, and our total share is $600. But you work and earn an income too. Grover, our income is irregular and small. We spend it on our personal needs, clothes, cosmetics, entertainment, and it's logical to cover family expenses from the family budget. And the most stable income in our family is your pension. I took a sip of coffee and looked out the window. Outside the window, I could see my little garden that I had planted after Ruth's death. There were tomatoes, cucumbers, peppers, some herbs. I loved working in the garden. It calmed me down, helped me not to think about sad things. This year's harvest was especially good, and I froze a lot of vegetables for the winter. Maisel, what if I don't agree with your plan? I asked. The expression on her face changed. The friendly smile was gone, and I saw something cold in her eyes. Grover, I thought you were a reasonable man. It's not like we're asking you to do anything impossible. We just want to get our finances in order. But it's my money, Maisel. I've worked 40 years to earn this pension. And no one says it's not your money, she said, a metallic note in her voice. But you don't live alone. You have a family that loves you and cares for you. Ted goes to work every day to contribute to the family budget. I cook, I clean the house, I take care of the household. Doesn't that cost anything? Of course it does, but… Grover, she interrupted me, you realize at your age it's not safe to live alone? What if something happens to you? Who will be there to help you? We don't just live here because it's convenient for us. We care about you. I felt irritation rising up inside. She was talking to me like I was a decrepit old man who wouldn't live a week without their care. I'm 73 years old, but I feel fine. Go to the gym twice a week, drive a car, keep up with the house and garden. Maisel, I'm not an invalid or a helpless old man. Of course you're not, she agreed quickly. But anything can happen. And this way you know there are always people around who love you. People who love me. I remembered how 5 years ago, when they'd first moved in, Maisel had often said how grateful she was for my help, how much she appreciated my kindness. Ted was full of plans too. He was going to get a good job. They wanted to rent their own apartment once they got back on their feet. 5 years have passed, and instead of gratitude, I hear demands for half of their pension. What about Ted? Does he agree with your plan? Of course he agrees. It was his idea in the first place. So it was his son's idea. Somehow that made it even more painful. Ted, whom I'd raised alone after Ruth died, whom I'd bought the best things for, whom I'd spent my savings on when he was in technical school, now wanted half my pension. Grover, Maisel said, and her voice became soft again. I realize this is a big change for you, but think of it as an investment in our joint family. The more stable our finances are, the more comfortable life will be for all of us. I finished my coffee and put the cup in the sink. A tit flew past the kitchen window and perched on the branch of an apple tree. Every morning I poured seeds to the birds on the feeder, which I made myself in my workshop. The birds got used to me and did not fly away when I appeared in the garden. I need time to think, I said. Maisel nodded, but I noticed that her jaw was tense. Of course, Grover. Just don't take too long. It's the first of the month, and it's time to plan next month's budget. The first of the month. So they want to start implementing their plan next month. I got up from my desk and headed for the door. Grover, Maisel called out to me. What are you having for dinner? I was thinking of making your favorite meat casserole. I don't know yet, I answered. Maybe I'll be late. As I left the kitchen, I heard her tucking her papers back into the folder. Every rustle of a sheet of paper was a reminder that my life was going to be organized into columns and line items. It had been a sleepless night. I lay in my bedroom, listening to the wind rustling through the old oak trees outside my window, and thought about how it had all started. When Ruth died, Ted was only 10 years old. A little boy who was suddenly without a mother and didn't understand why she wouldn't come home and make him breakfast and help him with his homework. At that time, I did not understand how to go on living, but I knew one thing. I had to be strong for my son. The first months after the funeral were the hardest. Ted often cried at night, calling for his mom, and I sat next to his bed and didn't know what to say. How to explain to a 10-year-old that mommy was never coming back? How could I comfort him when I was ready to howl with grief? Ruth wasn't just my wife. She was my rock, my best friend, the person I planned to spend my life with. But children need attention, whether you're willing to give it or not. Ted needed breakfast and lunch, clean clothes, help with his homework. He needed someone to walk him to school and pick him up after school. I took a month off to establish a new routine, learn how to cook simple meals, deal with grocery shopping and housekeeping. Ruth had always done the housekeeping, and I worked on the railroad and came home tired. Now I had to master her duties too. Neighbor Dolores Harper, a woman in her 50s who lived across the street, would sometimes drop by to help. She brought prepared food, taught me how to wash and iron, and showed me how to clean the house. Without her help, the first few months would have been even harder. Dolores understood what it was like to raise a child alone. Her husband had died in a car accident when their son was 12. Ted took the loss of his mother hard. He began to have problems at school. He began to study badly, fought with his classmates, sometimes skipped classes. Teachers called me for talks, explaining that the boy needed the help of a psychologist. But there were no psychologists for children in our small town, and I could not go to the neighboring city every week. My work did not allow me. I tried to compensate for the lack of professional help with my own attention. In the evenings, Ted and I did homework together. I helped him with math and English. On weekends, we went fishing or to an amusement park in a neighboring town. I bought him books, toys, a bicycle, anything that could brighten his grief a little. I spent money sparingly, even though my salary as a machinist wasn't that great. Gradually, Ted began to come to his senses. By the time he was 13, he stopped crying at night, began to study better, made new friends. I rejoiced at his every success, a good grade, a win in a school contest, a new friendship. It seemed that the worst was over, and we could move on with our lives, but the teenage years brought new problems. Ted became withdrawn and irritable, began to argue with me on any occasion. At 15, he said he didn't want to go on studying, that school was a waste of time. I tried to explain to him the importance of education, but he wouldn't listen. He said he wanted to quit school and go to work so that he could become independent as soon as possible. Then I realized for the first time that raising a teenager is much more difficult than a small child. With a baby, everything is simple: fed, dressed, played, read a bedtime story. But a teenager requires understanding of his complex experiences, patience with his rebelliousness, and wisdom in resolving conflicts. And all this without Ruth, who had a better approach to people than I did. I enrolled Ted in a boxing class, hoping that the sport would help him release his aggression and teach him discipline. At first it worked. The coach was a strict but fair man, and Ted respected him. But after a year, his interest in boxing faded, and my son started spending time on the street with friends I didn't like. At 17, Ted got involved with a group of local hooligans. They rode motorcycles, drank alcohol, and sometimes stole change from stores. One day, Ted was brought home by the police. He was involved in a fight outside a bar. I had to pay a fine and had a long talk with the district police officer, who warned me that the next time the consequences would be more serious. Then I made a decision that was not easy for me. I sold my old car and bought Ted a used motorcycle on the condition that he would finish school and help me with chores. The neighbors twiddled their thumbs. Why encourage bad behavior? But I hoped that my own motorcycle would distract my son from bad company, and partly my calculation was justified. Ted began to spend more time at home, taking care of the motorcycle and learning its structure. He still graduated from high school, although without honors. After graduation, he went to technical college to become an auto mechanic. I was happy. Finally, my son had a purpose in life. I paid for his education, bought textbooks and tools, gave money for travel and lunch. Ted studied averagely, but I did not pay much attention to it. The main thing was that he was getting a profession. But in the second year, an event happened that changed all our plans. Ted met Kyle Rivers, a guy from a rich family who was into fast money and dubious schemes to make money. Kyle convinced Ted that studying to be a mechanic is the lot of losers, and smart people find ways to get rich without long studies and hard work. Ted dropped out of college in his third year. I tried to dissuade him, promised to buy him a car after graduation, offered to find a good job through friends. But my son was adamant. He wanted to do business with Kyle. What kind of business it was, I never understood. They bought and resold something, went to neighboring towns to buy goods, invested money in some projects. They did well for the first few months. Ted even gave me $1,000. He said he was returning some of the money spent on his training. I was surprised and delighted. Perhaps my son had really found his way in life, I thought at the time. But the joy was premature. 6 months later, their business collapsed. Kyle disappeared with the joint money, and Ted was left with debts. It turned out he'd taken out a loan against his motorcycle and couldn't pay it back. I had to sell my stocks that I had bought with my pension to help my son pay off his debts. After this fiasco, Ted worked for a while as a mechanic at various car repair shops, but he never stayed long. He didn't like his boss or his colleagues, or the salary seemed small. He dreamed of his own car service and asked me to lend him money to start a business. I refused. I remembered the story with Kyle too well. At 28, Ted met Mizelle. She worked as a waitress at the Golden Horseshoe Bar and was 4 years younger than him. A beautiful girl with long blonde hair and bright makeup, Ted liked her immediately. He began to spend all the money he earned on courtship, took her to restaurants, bought gifts, rented a room in an expensive hotel for the weekend. After 3 months of dating, Ted brought Mizelle home and announced that they were getting married. I tried to suggest they wait, get to know each other better. But my son was in love and wouldn't listen to advice. The wedding took place 6 months after they met. Mizelle made a double impression on me. On the one hand, she was polite and charming, cooked well, looked after herself. On the other hand, in her eyes, I sometimes noticed some calculating, especially when it came to money or plans for the future. But Ted was happy, and that was the main thing for me. After the wedding, they rented an apartment in the center of town. I helped them with the down payment and furniture. Mizelle quit her job at the bar and got a job at a cosmetic store, and Ted found a position at a car service center near their home. The first year of their married life went relatively smoothly. But then the problems began. Ted quarreled with the owner of the car service and was fired. They couldn't find a new job. There were few vacancies for car mechanics in the small town, and Ted's references from his previous job were bad. The money ran out quickly, and the young people were unable to pay the rent. So Ted came to me for a loan, and then again, and again. In 6 months, I gave them over $3,000. Mizelle was pregnant, and I could not refuse. The future grandson or granddaughter needed a roof over his head and proper food. But in the 7th month of pregnancy, a miscarriage occurred. Mizelle ended up in the hospital. The medical bills were enormous. And a month after they were discharged, they were evicted from their apartment for non-payment of rent. Ted came to me with a request I couldn't refuse, to let them live in my house temporarily until they got back on their feet. I agreed. There was plenty of room in the house, 4 bedrooms, 2 of which had been empty since Ted had grown up. I thought they'd stay with me for a month or two, 6 months tops, and then get jobs and move out. But the temporary stay stretched on for 5 years. As I lay in the dark, I thought back over all those years and realized that somewhere along the way, I had lost a son. That little boy who cried for his mom and needed my protection had turned into a man who only saw me as a source of money. And his wife, whom I had accepted into my family and tried to love like a daughter, was now making plans on how to dispose of my pension. I woke up early, before dawn, and realized that the decision was ripe. All night long, my mind was spinning with memories of the past, and by morning it was clear. It was time to put an end to it. It was time to stop being a cash cow for my own son and his wife. I got up, showered, dressed, and went downstairs. The house was quiet. Ted and Mizelle were still asleep. I made myself a cup of coffee, fried some eggs and bacon, and ate my breakfast quietly, thinking about the upcoming conversation. I had to choose the right words, speak clearly, and not give in to emotional manipulation. I knew it wouldn't be easy. 5 years of living together had taught them how to press on my sore spots. Around 9 in the morning, Maiselle appeared in the kitchen. She looked sleepy, her hair disheveled, pillow marks on her face. When she saw me at the table, she yawned and headed for the coffee maker. "Morning, Grover. Up early today." "Good morning," I replied. "Maisel, when Ted wakes up, ask him to come downstairs. I need to talk to you." She turned to me, pouring coffee into a cup. "Talk about what?" "I hope you've made a decision about our family budget." "I have," I said briefly. Maisel smiled and sat down across from me. "I knew you'd see our point of view. You're a reasonable man. Let's wait for Ted and we'll discuss the details of our plan." I shook my head. "The details won't have to be discussed, but Ted needs to hear what I have to say." There must have been something in my voice that made Maisel wary. She looked at me carefully, took a sip of coffee, and went upstairs. 10 minutes later, Ted came down to the kitchen. He was dressed in old jeans and a t-shirt, his face still sleepy. Maisel followed, now fully awake and alert. "Good morning, Dad," Ted said, sitting down at the table. "Maisel says you want to talk to us." "Yes," I answered, folding my hands on the table. "I've made a decision about your family budget proposal." Maisel pulled the chair closer to Ted and took his hand. They looked at me with an expression of confidence in the positive outcome of the conversation. "What's the solution?" Ted asked. "I refuse to give you half of my pension," I said calmly. "And what's more, I want you to move out of my house." There was silence. Ted and Maisel looked at me as if I were speaking a foreign language. Maisel was the first to come to her senses. "What did you say?" "I said I want you to find another place to live and move out of here." Ted shook his head slowly. "Dad, are you serious? This is our house. We've lived here for 5 years. This is my house, Ted. My house that I bought with my own money 30 years ago. And I don't want you living here anymore." Maisel jumped up from his chair. "You can't be serious. We're family. Is that what you do to a family?" "Family," I repeated. "Family is when people take care of each other, not make plans to take half of an old person's pension." "We're not," Ted exclaimed. "We wanted to get our finances in order. That's different." "It's the same thing to me," I replied. "You want me to give you $600 every month out of the money I've earned in 40 years of honest labor. At the same time, you think you are doing me a favor by living in my house." Maisel walked around the table and stopped beside me. "Grover, you misunderstand. We don't want to rip you off. This money will be used for general family needs, groceries, utilities." "I pay for groceries and utilities," I said, rising from my chair. "And you want to get money from me for your personal expenses." "Harney, what personal expenses?" Ted was indignant. "We've shown you the exact calculations." "Precise calculations," I grinned. "How much did you budget for cosmetics for Maisel? For the cigarettes you buy every day? For beer on weekends? Gasoline for trips to your friends' houses?" "Those are small things," Maisel dismissed it. "Little things to you. To me, it's a way to control my life and my money." Ted got up and came over to me. "Dad, what's wrong with you? We've lived together for so many years. We've been fine. What's this scandal about?" "Everything was fine for you," I answered. "You lived for free in my house, ate my food, used my car when yours broke down, and now you've decided to legalize it." "We didn't live for free," Maisel objected. "I cook, I clean the house, I do the laundry. That's work too." "A job for which you're already getting paid. Living in a house worth $250,000 for free." Maisel turned pale. "Do you consider us freeloaders?" "I consider you people who take advantage of my kindness," I said. 5 years ago, you came here asking for temporary housing. Temporary turned into permanent, and now you want a salary." Ted grabbed my arm. "Dad, stop. You're saying terrible things. We're your family." I pulled my hand free. Family isn't people who live in the same house. Family is about people who love and respect each other. You don't respect me. To you, I'm just a source of money. "That's not true," shouted Maisel, and her voice became hysterical. "We love you. We take care of you. Who cooks your dinner? Who washes your clothes? Who cleans your house?" "I lived in this house for 30 years and did a great job with cooking, laundry, and cleaning, and I'll do the same after you leave." "After I'm gone?" Ted asked. "Dad, are you really going to kick us out?" "I'm not kicking you out. I'm giving you a month to find another place to live and move. A month? Maisel grabbed her head. You want us to find an apartment, collect a deposit, move our stuff in a month? That's impossible. You could have found an apartment and moved many times in 5 years, I said. But you preferred to live here for free. Ted came close to me. His face was flushed and there was a bad glint in his eyes. Dad, what if we don't want to move out? What are you going to do then? Call the police on your own son? I looked into his eyes and saw something there that scared me. A threat. My own son threatened me. Atats, if I have to, I will, I said calmly. You wouldn't dare, Maisel shrieked. Can you imagine what the neighbors will say? What will people think? An old man kicking out his own son with his pregnant wife. You're not pregnant, Maisel. What if I am? She put her hand on her belly. Would you throw your future grandson out on the street? I shook my head. Emotional blackmail, pure and simple. First the threats, now the non-existent pregnancy. Maisel, you're working. Ted can get a job if he wants one. You're young, healthy people. You're perfectly capable of renting an apartment and living on your own. With what? Ted screamed. On my part-time job at $15 an hour? On Maisel's salary at the cosmetics store? The same thing millions of other people rent apartments for, I replied. Get a regular job, not a casual job. It's not that easy to get a regular job. You could have found one in 5 years. But you didn't look hard because you knew you had a daddy who would feed you, keep you warm, and give you money for expenses. Maisel sat back in her chair and covered her face with her hands. I can't believe it, she said through her fingers. How can you do this to your family? That's exactly what I think of your behavior, I replied. How can you ask a 73-year-old man for half of his pension? Ted paced the kitchen, then stopped at the window. Dad, what if we abandoned our budget plan? If we leave everything the way it was? No, I said. It's too late. You've shown me your true attitude. Now I know what you think of me and my money. We think well of you, exclaimed Maisel, raising her head. We love you. Love my pension, I said. That's different things. You're being unfair. Ted turned from the window. We lived together for so many years. We had good times. We did, I agreed. But they ended when you made a plan to divide my money. Maisel got up and came over to me. Grover, let's forget this conversation. Let's sit down, have some coffee, talk quietly. Maybe we really did rush our proposal. It's too late, Maisel. Not too late, she grabbed my arm. People can change their minds. People can make mistakes. I pulled my hand free. They can. But I'm not changing my mind. You have a month to move out. What if we don't move? Ted asked, his voice threatening again. Then I'll go to a lawyer and formally demand that you vacate my house. And lawyers cost money, said Maisel. A lot of money. I have money, the same $600 a month you wanted to take from me. Ted laughed, but it was a nasty, angry laugh. Okay, Dad, that's fine. You stay alone in your house with your money. Let's see how you like being alone. Better alone than living with people who only see me as a source of income. We don't? I shouted Maisel. You misunderstand everything. I understand correctly, I answered and headed for the exit from the kitchen. You have a month. I suggest you make the most of it. As I walked out, I heard their furious whispering behind me. They were discussing the situation, plotting how to change my mind. But I knew my decision was final. The next day, I woke up feeling that I had made the right decision for the first time in years. No more doubts, no more hesitation. Ted and Maisel must have realized that last night's conversation was serious. They spent the whole evening in their rooms, talking in muffled voices, and in the morning they left the house without breakfast or a word to me. I waited until they were gone and went into town on my own business. The first thing I did was to visit Oswin Clutterbeck, the lawyer I had consulted a few years before when I made my will after Ruth's death. Oswin was a man in his 60s, an experienced lawyer with an impeccable reputation who specialized in family law and real estate matters. Oswin's office was in an old brick building in downtown Roanoke, on the second floor above an antique store. I walked up the creaky wooden stairs and knocked on the door with a sign that read, Oswin Clutterbeck, Attorney at Law. The receptionist, an elderly lady with glasses, informed me that Mr. Clutterbeck was free and ready to see me. Grover, exclaimed Oswin, rising from his massive oak desk. What are you doing here? I trust all is well? I shook his hand and sat down in the leather chair across the table. Not quite, Oswin. I need some advice on evicting the tenants. Oswin frowned and pulled out a notebook. Evictions? Are you having trouble with your tenants? You could say that, I replied. Only the tenants are my son and his wife. They've been living in my house for 5 years without any contract or rent. Oswin put down his pen and looked at me carefully. Tell me more. How did they end up in your house? I briefly summarized the situation, how Ted and Mazel had asked to live there temporarily after losing their apartment, how the temporary stay had lasted for years, and how they had recently demanded half of my pension for family expenses. I see, Oswin said when I finished my story. It's a delicate situation, but legally it's pretty clear. Since they don't pay rent and have no written contract, they are technically considered guests. You have every right to ask them to leave your home. And if they refuse, then you can take them to court for forced eviction. But first you need to give them a formal notice to vacate your home. You usually have 30 days to voluntarily move out. Oswin opened his desk drawer and took out a notice form. Mahram, I can draw up a formal notice right now. You hand it to them personally, preferably in the presence of witnesses, and get a receipt for it. Do it, please. Grover, said Oswin, beginning to fill in the form, I must warn you, family disputes of this nature can be very painful. Are you sure you want to go through with it? Absolutely sure, I answered without hesitation. Good. What about the will? Ted is listed as the sole heir. Is there anything you want to change? I thought about it. It was true that in my will, the house and all my property were to go to Ted when I died, but after recent events, that prospect no longer pleased me. We'll leave it as it is for now, I said, but I'll think about the changes. Oswin nodded and continued writing. 20 minutes later, the notice was ready. Clear legal language, no emotion, just facts and the requirements of the law. 30 days to voluntarily vacate the dwelling, followed by legal action. How much do I owe you? I asked, putting the document in my jacket pocket. Nothing yet. If the case goes to court, then we'll talk about the fee. As it is, it's a friendly consultation. I thanked Oswin and headed for the next step in my plan. Bert Garrison, the locksmith, had a shop on Main Street and was famous for making keys to any lock and installing any lock. I'd known him for 15 years, and he'd helped me with some minor repairs around the house. Mr. Callison, Bert greeted me, wiping his hands on his work apron. What brings you to my shop? I need to change the locks on the house, I said. All the locks, the front door, the back door, the garage door. Bert raised an eyebrow. A security problem? You could say that. I see. When do you need it done? As soon as possible. Can you come over this afternoon? Sure. Would 5 watch be okay? That's fine. Bert wrote down my address in his notebook, even though he already knew where I lived. Does anyone else have the old keys? Yes, I answered briefly. That's why we need a replacement. Bert nodded understandingly. In a small town, he'd probably encountered situations like this many times. The next stop was the utility office. I needed to notify them that as of the 1st of next month, all electric, gas, and water bills were to come in my name only. Not in the joint family, as had been the case before. The clerk, a young woman with a tired face, made the change in the computer database without further question. Who are the internet and cable TV accounts under? She asked. My son's name, I think. Can it be transferred to my name? You'll have to contact the provider directly. We're not connected to them. I wrote down the phone number of the internet and TV company and promised myself to call them tomorrow. By lunchtime, all the basic business was done. I went into Mary's Cafe for a snack and to think about what to do next. The waitress Rose, who had worked there for over 20 years, brought me the usual order of fried chicken with vegetable garnish and coffee. Mr. Callison, she said, setting the plate on the table, I hear there's some trouble at home. News travels fast in a small town. Apparently, some of the neighbors have already noticed the tense atmosphere in our house. Family problems, I answered evasively. I understand, Rose nodded. If you need anything, you're welcome. I've had kids growing up and moving away myself, and I know what it's like. I thanked her for her concern and went on with my meal. The chicken was excellent, as always, but I had no appetite. Too many thoughts in my head, Too many things to do. After lunch, I went to the bank to make sure my accounts were secure from unauthorized access. The bank manager, Paul Davison, assured me that I was the only one authorized to handle my accounts, but suggested that I change my card PIN number and set up notifications of all transactions on my cell phone. I got home around 3 in the afternoon. Ted's car wasn't in the yard, but the house wasn't empty. There were voices coming from the second-story windows. Apparently, Maisel had returned, and maybe Ted had too. I went to my office on the first floor and sat down at my desk to make a list of next steps. The first thing was to formally serve them with an eviction notice, preferably in the presence of a witness, so it was worth asking one of the neighbors to be present. Wendy Prescott would probably agree to help, given her own experience of family trouble. There was also the safety of the house to consider. Who knows how Ted and Maisel would react to the official notice? Ted had already shown aggression yesterday, and people were capable of many things when they were angry. Maybe we should have installed an additional alarm system. At 5 o'clock in the evening, Bert arrived with his tools. He worked quickly and carefully, replacing all 3 locks in an hour and a half. The new keys glistened in my hands, a symbol of my freedom from unwanted tenants. "The locks are solid," Bert said as he packed up his tools. "They won't be easy to pick." "I hope it doesn't come to that," I said. "Where are the old keys? Shouldn't we destroy them?" "The people who won't be living here anymore have them." Bert nodded and didn't ask any more questions. It's a professional quality to keep your mouth shut. When the locksmith left, I sat on the porch and waited for Ted and Maisel to return. The sun was slipping toward the west and the air was getting cooler. The birds were chirping in the garden, getting ready for bed. Usually this time of day brought me peace, but now I felt tense. Around 7 p.m., Ted's shabby Honda pulled into the yard. He got out of the car first, followed by Maisel with some packages in his hands. When they saw me on the porch, they looked at each other, but headed toward the house. "Good evening," I said neutrally. "Hi, Dad," Ted mumbled, walking to the door. He put the key in the lock and turned it. The key wouldn't turn. Ted frowned and tried again. The result was the same. "What the hell?" he muttered, scrutinizing the lock. "I changed the locks," I informed him calmly. Maisel dropped the bags. "You did what?" "Changed the locks on the whole house. I'm the only one with keys now." Ted turned to me, his face red. "Dad, are you crazy? How are we going to get in the house?" "We don't," I said, getting up off the porch. "Not while you're living here anyway." "What do you mean you can't?" Maisel was indignant. "Our things are in there. Our clothes. You can have your things in my presence. You'll live somewhere else." Ted came right up to me. "Dad, open the door right now." "No," I said, "open the door." I said, "Don't. And get away from me, Ted. Don't make me regret my decision anymore." Maisel picked up the bags and came over to us too. "Grover, this is crazy. You can't kick us out. We don't have money for a hotel. You've had 5 years to save up for your own place." "We've been saving," she screamed. "But there's not enough money for the security deposit on the apartment. So you should have saved more and spent less." Ted walked across the porch, then stopped and pounded his fist on the railing. "I can't believe my own father is kicking me out on the street." "I'm not kicking you out on the street. I'm asking you to find your own place and live on your own, like all adults do." Maisel pulled out her cell phone. "I'm calling the police. This is illegal." "Call them," I said. "Just listen to this first." I took the eviction notice out of my pocket and unfolded it. An official notice to vacate the premises, drafted by attorney Oswin Clutterbeck in accordance with state law. You have 30 days to voluntarily move out. Ted snatched the paper from me and ran his eyes over the text. "You hired a lawyer against your own son?" "I'm defending my rights to my own home." Maisel read the document over Ted's shoulder. Her face went white. 30 days, she whispered. "Grover, do you really want us to move out?" "I do." "But why? Because of that budget talk? We can forget about it." "Too late, Maisel. You've shown me your true colors." Ted folded the notice and stuffed it in his pocket. "Okay, Dad, that's fine. But just know that after this, you're going to lose your son forever. I'll never forgive you for that." "I lost my son the moment he demanded half of my pension," I replied, "and the rest doesn't matter." Maisel sobbed and put her hand to her mouth. "Grover, think about what you're doing. Think about your family." "I am," I said. "And the more I think, the more I'm convinced I'm making the right decision." Ted grabbed Maisel's hand. "Let's go. There's nothing more for us to do here. And the things, she asked. We'll come for our stuff tomorrow, Ted said, not looking at me. With the lawyer. They headed for the car. I stood on the porch and watched my son and his wife get into the old Honda. The engine didn't start right away, sneezed a few times, but then it started. The car drove out of the yard and I was alone. The house was very quiet. I went through the rooms, checked the new locks, turned on the TV in the living room. The screen was showing the evening news, but I wasn't listening. I thought about what had happened and marveled at my own calm. No regret, no doubt, only relief that I had finally made the right decision. Around 9 o'clock in the evening, the doorbell rang. I looked out the window and saw Wendy Prescott with a tray in her hands. "Good evening, Grover," she said when I opened the door. "Brought you some supper. Thought you wouldn't want to cook after a day like this." The tray was smoldering hot soup and a piece of fresh bread. The smell was amazing. "Thank you, Wendy. That's very nice of you." "May I come in?" she asked. "Or would you rather be alone?" "Sure, come in." We went into the kitchen, and Wendy put the tray on the table. "I heard you had a change in the house today." "News travels fast. Bert Harrison told his wife he changed your locks, and Jane saw your son and daughter-in-law leave without their belongings. It's not hard to put two and two together." I sat down at the table and had some soup. Chicken and noodles, very tasty. "You did the right thing," Wendy said, sitting down across from me. "I know what it's like when people close to you take advantage of your kindness." "You do." It took me 3 years to realize that my daughter only saw me as a free babysitter for her grandchildren and a source of money for her needs. "You figured it out faster." "Traumakaritim. They helped me figure it out," I said. "When they demanded half my pension." Wendy shook her head. "The nerve of them. What are you planning to do next?" "To live in peace in my house and spend my pension as I see fit." "That's a good plan," Wendy smiled. "And if you need help, don't hesitate to ask. Neighbors should support each other." When she left, I finished my soup, washed the dishes, and sat in the living room in front of the TV. The house seemed surprisingly spacious and quiet. For the first time in 5 years, I could watch any program I wanted without regard for anyone else's preferences. I could go to bed when I wanted and get up when I wanted. Could cook what I liked, not what others demanded. The phone rang around 10 o'clock at night. A number I didn't recognize popped up on the screen. "Hello?" I answered. "Uncle Grover?" There was a woman's voice. It was Asta, Maisel's sister. Asta Gilchrist, a 30-year-old woman who lived in a neighboring town and worked as an accountant for a small firm. I'd seen her a few times at family gatherings. A quiet, unassuming person, the opposite of her boisterous sister. "Good evening, Asta." "Uncle Grover, I'm calling about Maisel and Ted. They're at my house right now, completely upset. Maisel's crying, saying you threw them out. I asked them to find their own place." "But they're your family. How can you kick a family out?" I sighed. Another attempt at pity. "Asta, do you know that they demanded half of my pension for their own use?" "I know," Maisel told me. "But it's not unreasonable, is it? You live together. You share a household." "We don't share a household, Asta. I pay all the expenses of the house and they live on my dime." "But Maisel cooks for you. She cleans the house. For that she gets free lodging in a house worth $250,000. Asta was silent for a few seconds. "Uncle Grover, can't you find a compromise?" Maisel says she's ready to withdraw her offer. "It's too late, Asta. They've shown me their true attitude." "But where will they go?" "They don't have the money to rent an apartment. Ted can get a full-time job instead of a part-time job. Maisel can work full-time. Millions of people rent on their paychecks. It's not easy these days. It's not easy anytime, Asta. But that's the life of grown-up, independent people. Uncle Grover, I'm asking you to reconsider, for the sake of the family. My decision is final," I said and hung up. The phone rang again a few minutes later. It was the same number. I didn't answer. Then it rang again, and again. Finally, I disconnected the phone and went to bed. Tomorrow would be a new day, and I needed strength for further action. The next morning, I woke up to the doorbell ringing. It was still early, around 7 in the morning. The sun was just starting to rise above the horizon. I threw on my robe and went downstairs, peering out the living room window. An unfamiliar gray car was parked by the porch, and I saw 2 people beside it, an older woman in a dark coat and a middle-aged man in a suit. Opening the door, I was confronted by a pair of strangers who looked at me with an expression of poorly concealed judgment. "Mr. Callison?" the woman asked. "I'm Deborah Gilchrist, Maisel's mother, and this is my son Clive. So Maisel's parents and brother are here to deal with the situation." I wasn't surprised. Asta's call yesterday was just the beginning. The Maisel family I knew was very close-knit, and any problems were discussed collectively. "Good morning, Asararum," I said neutrally. "What brings you to me so early?" "We came to talk to you about our children," Deborah said. She was in her mid-60s, her gray hair in a severe style, a look of righteous anger on her face. "Maisel has been crying all night. She told us about your decision." "What decision?" "That you're kicking them out of the house," Clive intervened. He was a tall man of about 35, with a square jaw and cold gray eyes. "Maisel says you've changed the locks and won't let them into your own house." "It's my house," I corrected, "and I asked them to find another place to live." "But they're your family," Deborah exclaimed. "Is that what you do to family?" I sighed. Apparently, Maisel had told her parents her version of events, which made her and Ted look like innocent victims of an abusive old man. "Would you like to come in and talk quietly?" I suggested. "We do," Clive said firmly. We walked into the living room. Deborah sat down on the sofa, looking around with the air of a man appraising a property. Clive remained standing with his arms crossed over his chest. "Mr. Callison," Deborah began, "my daughter told me what happened. They offered you a sensible family budget plan, and you reacted completely inadequately." "A reasonable plan?" I interjected. "They demanded half of my pension." "Not demanded, but suggested a fair distribution of the family income," Clive corrected me. "In normal families, all the money goes into a common pot. In normal families, everyone in the family works and contributes to the family budget. In ours, I'm the only one who works and everyone spends." Deborah snorted. "Maisel works. Ted works too. They're not slackers. Maisel works part-time at a cosmetics store. Ted picks up odd part-time jobs. In 5 years, he's had over 10 jobs." "It's not easy to get a good job these days," said Clive, "especially for people with no connections and no college education." "But it's not hard to demand money from an elderly relative," I said. Deborah got up from the sofa and came over to me. "Mr. Callison, you don't understand the situation. Maisel and Ted didn't ask you for money for entertainment or luxuries. They asked for a fair share of the family budget. They live with you, take care of you, run your household." "Taking care of me?" I grinned. "In what way?" "Maisel cooks your meals, washes your clothes, cleans the house," Deborah listed. "What would you do without them? Who would take care of you when you were sick?" I was fine with cooking, laundry, and cleaning before they came to my house, and I'll be fine after they're gone. Clive walked around the living room, looking at the furniture and pictures on the walls. "It's a beautiful house," he said. "Big, spacious. It's a shame it's going to be a one-man place." The implication was clear. Why would I want such a big house all to myself? It made sense to share it with a young family. "This is my house," I repeated. "I bought it, I furnished it, I pay for it, and I decide who lives in it." "But Ted is your only son," Deborah exclaimed. "When you're gone, he'll still have the house. What difference does it make whether he lives there now or later? The difference is that now I'm still alive, and I have the right to dispose of my property." Clive stopped by the fireplace and turned to me. "Mr. Callison, let's be honest. You are 73 years old. You live alone in a big house. Sooner or later, health problems will arise and you'll need help. Who's going to take care of you? Who will cook, clean, take you to the doctors? I'll hire a nurse if I have to." "A nurse is expensive," Deborah said. "And it's a stranger. And Maisel and Ted are family. They'll take care of you out of love, not money." I looked at her and thought how naive she thought I was. "Deborah, your daughter and my son already take care of me for money. They live in my house for free, eat my food, use my utilities, drive my gasoline, and now they want direct cash payments." "It's not a cash payment," Clive was outraged. "It's a family budget. It's a joint spending plan. Planning my expenses by people who don't earn enough money to live on their own." Deborah returned to the sofa and sat down with her hands folded in her lap. "Mr. Callison, I understand that you're upset. Perhaps the children were indeed hasty in their proposal. But is that really a reason to destroy a family?" I didn't destroy the family. It was the people who set up a plan to divide my pension without my knowledge or consent. But it can be fixed, she said hopefully. The children are ready to apologize, ready to forget about their proposal. It's too late, I replied. They showed me how they really felt about me. Clive went to the window and looked out into the yard. What if they couldn't find another place to live in a month? What if they don't have enough money for the deposit and the first month's rent? That would be their problem. They had 5 years to save up money and find their own place. 5 years during which they helped you around the house and kept you company, Deborah pointed out. 5 years in which they lived for free and spent my money. Deborah got up and walked over to me. Tears welled up in her eyes. Mr. Callison, I'm asking you as a mother. Maisel is my youngest daughter. I can't watch her suffer. Please give them another chance. No, they're willing to do whatever it takes. They're willing to pay your rent. With what money? They don't have a steady income. They'll find better jobs. Ted's already said he's going to look for a permanent place. 5 years he's been saying that. Clive moved away from the window and stood next to his mother. Mr. Callison, what will people say? What will the neighbors think? The old man threw his own son and his wife out on the street. The neighbors already know the situation, and they support me. Not everyone will be supportive, Clive said with menace in his voice. People will condemn your behavior. Everyone knows everyone in this town. Your reputation will suffer. I looked at him carefully. Now the threats were beginning. My reputation is based on 40 years of honest work and decent living, not on whether I let grown men live off me. Deborah wiped her eyes with her handkerchief. Mr. Callison, I don't understand what's happened to you. Maisel always said you were a kind and generous man, and now I'm a reasonable man. Reasonable? Is kicking your family out reasonable? Protecting my home and my money from people who think I'm a cash cow? Yes, that's reasonable. Clive took a step toward me. Mr. Callison, aren't you afraid of being all alone? No family, no loved ones? It's better to be alone than with people who use you. Maisel and Ted aren't using you. Yes, they are. 5 years of free accommodation plus a claim on half your pension isn't taking advantage? Deborah cried again, louder this time. Maisel was so hoping you'd be a second father to her. She lost her daddy when she was 20, and now she's losing you. Emotional blackmail, pure and simple. I'm tired of this conversation. Deborah, Clive, I understand you're worried about Maisel, but my decision is final. They have 30 days to find another place to live. And if they don't, Clive asked, they will if they want to. And if they don't want to leave, then I'll go to court. The courts? Deborah gasped. Against your own son? Against the people who are illegally occupying my house. Clive and Deborah looked at each other. They must have realized that their mission had failed. Well, Clive said, heading for the door, now we know who we're dealing with. You're dealing with a man who's defending his rights, I replied. Deborah stopped in the doorway and turned around. Mr. Callison, what if Maisel gets sick from worrying? If something happens to her? See a doctor. You're a heartless man, she shouted. I'm a realist. When they left, I made myself breakfast and sat at the table, thinking about the visit from Maisel's relatives. Everything went predictably. The tears, the threats, the attempts to induce guilt. Typical strategy of people who are used to getting their way through emotional pressure. Around 10 in the morning, the doorbell rang again. This time Ted came in, alone, without Maisel. He looked awful, unshaven, red-eyed, in crumpled clothes. Hi, Dad, he said quietly. Hi, Ted. Can I come in? I need to talk to you. I let him into the house. We walked into the living room, where the smell of Deborah's perfume still lingered. Maisel's parents were here, Ted said, sniffing. They were. Tried to change my mind. Did it work? No. Ted sat back in his chair and put his head in his hands. Dad, I came to apologize. Maisel and I, we did the wrong thing. We shouldn't have demanded money from you. I sat down across from him and looked closely at his face. Ted looked genuinely upset, but I no longer trusted his emotions. Ted, what makes you think you're entitled to my pension? I don't know, he mumbled. It was Maisel's idea. She said we were a family, that everything should be shared. And you agreed with her. Yes, I did. It made sense to me. I mean, we live together. We share a household. Ted, did you ever think that I might not want to give half of my pension? I did, he admitted. But Maisel said you'd understand, that all fathers help their children. Help them when they need it. They don't ask for permanent support. Ted raised his head and looked at me. Dad, what if we abandoned our plan? What if everything goes back to the way it was? No, Ted, it's too late. But why? Because people can make mistakes. They can. But your mistake showed me how you really feel about me. We love you. Love my money. Ted got up and started pacing around the room. Dad, I understand that you're upset, but are you really willing to ruin our family because of one bad conversation? You ruined our family when you made a plan to divide my pension. We can forget the whole thing. We can pretend this conversation never happened. I can't forget. I don't want to. Ted stopped in front of the window and stared out into the yard for a long time. Dad, what if I got a regular job? A good job with a decent paycheck? It wouldn't change anything. But why? Because money isn't the problem, Ted. It's an attitude problem. You think I'm your property, your source of income, that should support you for life. That's not true. Yes, it is. Otherwise, you wouldn't have dared to demand half my pension. Ted turned to me and I could see the desperation in his eyes. Dad, I'm your son. I'm your only son. Doesn't that mean anything? It does. But it doesn't give you the right to control my life or my money. We didn't. We just suggested a fairer distribution. Fairer for whom? Ted stopped talking. He realized he'd been caught. Ted, I said softly, you're my son, and I love you. But love doesn't mean I have to support you for the rest of your life. I'm not asking you to support me. Yes, you are. 5 years of free accommodation plus half your pension is asking for maintenance. But where are we going to go? We don't have money to rent an apartment. Get a job. Save up some money. Do what all normal people do. Ted sat back in his chair. Dad, what if we paid you rent? Say $300 a month? No, $400? Ted, it's not about the money. It's that I don't want to live in the same house with you anymore. Why not? Because you've poisoned the atmosphere with your demands. Now every time I see you, I'll remember that you wanted to take half my pension. Ted sat silent for a few minutes, staring at the floor. So you're really kicking us out. I'm asking you to live on your own. It's the same thing. No, it's not the same thing. I'm not throwing you out on the street immediately. I'm giving you a month to find a place to live. A month is a very short time. You could find an apartment many times over in 5 years. Ted got up and headed for the door. All right, Dad, if that's what you decide. But just know you won't see us again. Not ever. Maybe, I said. Serenue, but it's your choice, not mine. My choice? You're the one kicking us out. I'm asking you to live on your own, and you choose whether or not to stay in touch with me after I move out. Ted stopped at the door. Are we not going to see each other at Christmas too? The question caught me off guard. Christmas had always been a special time in our family. After Ruth died, I'd had a holiday dinner for Ted every year, and when he got married, for him and Maisel. It's up to you, I said after a pause. So if we move out, we'll come to visit? If you want to. Would you want to see us? I wondered. Did I want to see them after everything that had happened? Honestly, I didn't know. Time would tell, I answered. Ted nodded and left. I stood at the window and watched him get into his old car. The engine didn't start right away, it coughed, but then it did. The car drove out of the yard and I was alone again. The rest of the day passed quietly. I did household chores, read, watched TV. The phone rang a few times, but I didn't answer it. Unfamiliar numbers popped up on the screen, and I suspected it was Maisel's relatives again. In the evening, Wendy came in with another meal. This time a meat casserole and salad. How's it going? She asked, setting the containers on the table. Aren't you taking the change too hard? I'm fine, I answered. Better than I expected. Have they tried to change your mind yet? They did. Maisel's parents and Ted came by today. What did they say? Same thing, that I was destroying the family, that they were willing to make any concessions, that I'd be miserable without them. Wendy shook her head. Classic strategy. First demands, then threats, then tears and begging for forgiveness. My daughter had the same scenario. And you stood up to it? I did. It wasn't easy, though, especially when she brought her grandchildren and told them that Grandpa would never see them again unless he returned to his house. That was cruel, very cruel. But I knew that if I gave in, I would be a puppet in my daughter's hands for the rest of my life. We had dinner together, and Wendy told me about her life after moving into the small apartment. It turned out that the first months were really hard. It was not easy to get used to a new home at 70 years old. But gradually she realized that she had gained freedom. She could plan her time as she wanted, spend money on her own needs, meet with friends without looking at other people's opinions. Does your daughter communicate with you? I asked. She calls sometimes. She congratulates me on holidays, but the relationship will never be the same. She showed me her true face, and I won't forget it. Do you regret your decision? No, Wendy answered without hesitation. Not for a moment. It's better to live alone, but with dignity, than in a family that doesn't respect you. After dinner, we sat in the living room and drank tea. The house was quiet and peaceful. Outside the window, the twilight was fading. The streetlights were on. It was the usual small-town evening scene, but tonight it seemed especially peaceful to me. You know, Wendy, I said, for the first time in years, I feel like I'm doing something right. Of course you are. You're defending your life and your rights. Took me a long time to get to that point, but I've gotten there. Not all people are able to set boundaries with their loved ones. Most people live their whole lives letting themselves be taken advantage of. After Wendy left, I sat in the living room for a long time, thinking about the future. In a month, Ted and Mazel would be moving out, and I would be living alone. Perhaps it will be lonely. Perhaps I'll miss the voices in the house, the sounds of other people's lives. But it will be my life, lived by my rules, on my money, in my house. And that thought brought me deep satisfaction. On the 29th, the day before the official deadline I'd given them for eviction expired, Ted called me in the morning. His voice was cold and formal, as if he were talking to a stranger. Dad, we're coming over today to get our stuff. In the afternoon, about 5 o'clock. Okay, I answered. I'll be home. We'll bring the truck. It'll take us a few hours to pack everything up. You'll have as much time as you need. And another thing, Ted was quiet for a moment. We want a witness present when we take the stuff out, in case you say we stole something. That hurt. My own son suspected me of accusing him of stealing. Suit yourself, I said. You can bring whoever you want. We'll bring Uncle Clive. He'll make sure it's all legal. At 5 o'clock sharp, 2 cars drove into the yard, Ted's old Honda and a small truck. Clive's gray car came in next. I looked out the window and saw Ted, Mazel, Clive, and 2 other men, probably movers, getting out of the cars. Clive was the first to arrive at the house, where he knocked on the door with a formal knock. Good evening, Mr. Callison, he said. We've come for Ted and Mazel's things. Come in, I replied, stepping aside. Ted and Mazel followed without saying hello to me. Mazel was wearing a black coat, looking pale and tense. Ted was somber, too, his eyes never meeting mine. Where are the movers? I asked. Waiting in the yard, Clive answered. First, we want to make a list of the things we'll be moving. Clive took out a notebook and began to write down their things. Half an hour later, the movers were called and there was a rush. People with boxes, bags, suitcases were coming down the stairs. I stood aside and watched. Grover, Mazel said to me, coming out of the kitchen with a box. Can I have our pictures? Where are Ted and me? Take the ones of you, I said. An hour later, the movers were taking out the furniture, a bed, a chest of drawers, a table. Clive was going around the house, checking that nothing had been forgotten. Ted, I called out as he walked by with a box. He stopped, but didn't look up. What? Maybe we should talk. Just quietly, without witnesses? What is there to talk about? He answered coldly. You've made your decision. We're sticking to it. Ted, you're my son. I don't want there to be animosity between us. Ted raised his eyes and looked at me. There was pain in his gaze, but even more anger. You chose enmity when you kicked us out of the house. I didn't kick you out. I asked you to live on your own. Same thing. All the stuff was taken out. The movers closed the truck and drove away. Clive sat in the car waiting. The 3 of us stayed in the yard. Well, Ted said, it's time to say goodbye. It doesn't have to be goodbye forever, I objected. It does, said Mazel. After what you've done to us, we'll never see you again. Maisel, I have done nothing wrong to you. You betrayed us, she screamed. Grover, know that you will never see your grandchildren again. What grandchildren? The ones we're going to have, and those children will never know they have a grandfather. All right, I replied calmly. It's your decision. Ted took a step toward me. Dad, what are you going to do when you get sick? Who's going to take care of you? I'll hire a nurse. For money? For money? You see, Maisel exclaimed. Weshtam, you're willing to pay strangers, but not your family. I pay strangers for specific services. I gave money to my family out of love. Clive honked his horn, tired of waiting. We've got to go, said Ted. Goodbye, then. Forever, Maisel said, and walked to the car. Ted lingered for a few seconds. Dad, do you know Mom wouldn't approve of what you did? Don't speak for Mom, I replied. You don't know what she would say. I do. She always said family is sacred. Family is sacred when it's based on love and respect, not financial gain. Ted headed for the car. Goodbye, Dad. I'll see you at your funeral. They drove off, leaving me alone in the yard. I entered the house and walked through the rooms, turning on the lights. In the guest bedroom, all that remained were built-in closets and bare walls. But most importantly, the feeling of someone else's presence in the house was gone. I sat down in my favorite chair and felt completely calm for the first time in a month. Yes, I was sad that I had lost my son, but along with the sadness came relief. I was in charge of my life again. 3 months later, I woke up in my bedroom to the sound of rain drumming on the roof. It was late November, and fall in Roanoke was rainy and cool. But the rain didn't upset me. On the contrary, I loved those mornings when I could take my time, drink coffee, and read the paper. During these 3 months, my house had changed completely. Not externally. The furniture remained in the same places. The atmosphere has changed. Gone was the tension that I didn't even notice until it was gone. The house became a place of peace again, not a battleground for territory and resources. The first month after Ted and Maisel left was the hardest. I became accustomed to the sounds of other people's lives in the house. Conversations, music, phone calls. The silence seemed unnatural, almost frightening. But gradually I learned to appreciate this silence. I realized that it was not emptiness, but space for my own thoughts, desires, plans. In the morning, I would go down to the kitchen, make breakfast just the way I liked it, and eat while reading the newspaper from the first to the last page. Maisel used to always turn the radio up to full volume in the morning. Now the house was blissfully quiet, broken only by the birds singing outside the window. During the first month of being alone, I completely remodeled the guest bedroom where Ted and Maisel lived. I took down the old wallpaper and painted the walls a light blue color, changed the furniture so it became my office. I put a desk by the window, hung shelves for books, installed a comfortable chair for reading. My financial situation has also improved considerably. My $1,200 pension was now entirely mine. My utility bills were almost halved. Groceries were required much less. I had saved more money in the first month of being single than I had in 6 months of living together. I spent that money on home improvements. I bought a new TV, a good coffee maker, upgraded my closet. I hadn't bought myself clothes in a long time, because all the spare money went to Ted and Maisel. But the most important change was in my state of mind. The constant stress was gone. No longer did I have to listen to complaints about not having enough money. No longer did I have to endure hints that I wasn't helping my family enough. My sleep became deeper, my appetite improved, and my headaches disappeared. Not a peep from Ted and Maisel in those 3 months. At first I expected them to try to patch things up, but then I realized that they really did consider me the enemy. To be honest, it didn't upset me as much as I expected. The Ted who demanded half my pension was no longer the boy I'd raised after Ruth's death, but there were new, healthier relationships. First of all, with my neighbor Wendy Prescott. What started out as a friendly encouragement turned into a real friendship. Wendy would come by 2 or 3 times a week, and I would visit her, helping her with minor repairs. It turned out we had a lot in common. Both had lost spouses, both had faced the ingratitude of adult children, both had learned to appreciate independence. Wendy was a smart woman with a good sense of humor. She didn't try to change me, didn't demand money, just a sincere friend. On this rainy day, Wendy was to come in the afternoon with an apple pie from her grandmother's recipe. I was looking forward to her visit. After breakfast, I got busy cleaning the house. It had now become a simple and pleasant procedure. No one was throwing things around or leaving dirty dishes. Half an hour and the house looked perfect again. Then I went out to the garden, which over the summer had become my special pride. Without the need to feed 3 people, I was able to grow not only vegetables but also flowers. I planted roses, lilies, chrysanthemums. Working in the garden became a real hobby, a source of joy. At 4 o'clock in the afternoon, the doorbell rang. Wendy was standing on the porch with a box from which came the aroma of fresh baked goods. "Good afternoon, Grover," she said, smiling. "Brought the promised pie." We went into the kitchen and I put the kettle on. The pie was wonderful, golden with a ruddy crust. I took out the beautiful plates I'd bought a month ago. I'd rarely used good dishes before because Ted and Maisel treated things carelessly. "How are you doing, Grover?" Wendy asked. "Don't you get bored alone?" "No," I answered honestly. "On the contrary, I'm enjoying the peace." "I see, it was the same for me." We tasted the pie and it was delicious. We talked about plans for the winter, about books. Wendy talked about her art classes. I shared my plans to remodel the kitchen in the spring. "Had you heard anything from the kids?" Wendy asked cautiously. "No, I haven't, and I'm not expecting any more." "How do you feel about it?" You know, it hurt at first, but then I realized that the Ted I loved had disappeared years ago, and the man who was demanding half my pension is a different man. "You don't regret your decision?" "Not for a second. On the contrary, I wish I'd made it sooner." After tea, we went into the living room. Wendy marveled at the changes in the house. "You have a different atmosphere now," she said. "It's like the house breathes freely." "Any plans for the future?" "Yes. I want to travel more. I've wanted to go to Europe for a long time. I used to spend my money on my family, but now I can spend it on my dreams." Wendy left around 7ish on p.m., leaving me half a pie. I ate dinner, read a book, and went to bed early. As I lay in bed, I thought about how my life had changed in those 3 months. Gone were the constant conflicts, the financial problems, the feeling of being used. Gone was the peace, the dignity, the ability to plan for the future. Yes, I lost my son and daughter-in-law, but in return, I found myself. I gained the right to live in my own house by my own rules, to spend my pension on my own needs, to socialize with people who respect me. Outside the window, it started to rain again, but now it didn't seem sad. And tomorrow the sun will rise again, and a new day of my free life will begin, a life without the toxic people who thought I was their property. I closed my eyes and fell asleep with the peaceful sleep of a man who had finally made the right choice.